this time the state calls Todd Bille.
You raise your right hand, please. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give the court on the issue now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you. Have a seat for me. And once seated, if you please state and spell your true and correct legal name for the record.
My name is Todd Bille. Last name is B as in boy, I-L-L-E.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon. If you'll please introduce yourself to the judge and explain how you are employed.
Todd Bille, I'm the Senior Scientist for the DNA section at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland.
Now, you say that you're a DNA scientist.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You said that you're a DNA scientist for the ATF. What does that mean?
So as a Senior Scientist, I act as in an advisory capacity to the Deputy Assistant Director of the Office of Science and Technology for the ATF Laboratory. I also perform research. I coordinate the research internally at the ATF Lab. I also coordinate research with other government agencies and external agencies. And then, as necessary now, I do some casework analysis as well.
Now, it probably goes without saying, but is the ATF an accredited lab?
Yes, sir.
Now, for the judge, can you describe your job responsibilities?
So as a Senior Scientist, like I said, I advise the Deputy Assistant Director of the OST. I also perform research on improving methods, research new methods that we could potentially implement, help with the validation of those methods, and then perform casework analysis.
Now, how long have you been with the ATF?
It's coming up on 20 years, since 2006.
And have you been specifically kind of in the DNA field with the ATF during that entire time?
Yes, sir.
Prior to being with the ATF since 2006, did you have any other experience dealing with DNA?
Yes, I started my forensic career with the Indiana State Police Laboratory in 1991. I was actually hired in the trace unit. As before they had a DNA unit, but later on that year they decided that they wanted to start a DNA unit. And since my background was in biochemistry, I transferred over to the DNA unit, helped start that unit. I was there for 10 years doing DNA analysis, serology analysis. Eventually, when the DNA technical leader position became a thing, I became the DNA technical leader of the laboratory. DNA technical leader is responsible for all DNA technical, or all aspects of the DNA analysis at the laboratory, so developing the methods, validating those methods, implementing them, performing research. You oversee all the training of the analysts. You're also responsible to make sure you're following all the quality assurance guidelines and that we comply with all the accreditation and national quality assurance standards. I was a DNA technical leader there, eventually became supervisor, and then in 2001, I was hired by the Bodie Technology Group, which is a private DNA laboratory in Northern Virginia, as the assistant laboratory director. And there I oversaw casework analysis and other special projects. For instance, I led the team to develop the DNA extraction methods and process flow for the DNA identification of some of the skeletal remains from the World Trade Center.
I'm sorry.
And then became the vice president of special projects there, involved doing different special projects with mass graves, mass humanitarian events. For instance, I went to Thailand after the tsunami in 2004-2005 to help with the identification there. Then in 2006, the ATF laboratory decided they wanted to have a DNA unit. They've had a laboratory, ATF has had a laboratory since late 1800s, but a lot of the DNA analysis up to that point wasn't really relevant to what they did. DNA analysis was typically body fluids such as blood, semen, saliva, but touch DNA analysis was becoming more prevalent at that time, and so that lent itself more to the type of evidence that we see at the ATF: firearms, explosive devices, and Molotov cocktails, things like that. So they hired me as well as two other people. They hired me as the DNA technical leader to lead the team to try to get DNA analysis at the ATF laboratory. There I was a DNA technical leader until about 2 years ago, and then I got promoted to the senior scientist position.
Now, with that experience, did you have education that led you towards becoming a DNA analyst for the ATF?
Yes. My Bachelor of Science degree is in biochemistry from Purdue University, and then I also have a Master's of Science degree from Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis.
And do you also continue your education through, I guess, CLEs or PowerPoints or anything to the sort?
Yes, so I went through my initial training in 1991, 1992 at the Indiana State Police Lab for general evidence handling. I went through general training at the Indiana State Police Lab for general evidence handling, and then DNA analysis, serology. Eventually, when I came to ATF, I wrote the training manual for there, oversaw training for most of the analysts. But then, as you said, we do continuing education through our entire career. In addition to keeping up with the literature, I've attended probably over 80 DNA workshops, training seminars, things like that over the course of almost 35 years now.
Now, how much of your time is actually devoted to DNA typing research?
100%.
Now,
Sorry, 100%.
Now, for the judge, what is DNA?
So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a substance in almost all the cells of your body. It's all the cells except for red blood cells. It contains the genetic information or the information that codes for most of your physical characteristics. Most of the DNA across all individuals is the same, which is why we all have 2 eyes, a nose, 2 ears, etc. But there are small differences in that DNA that we look at as forensic scientists. You can think of DNA as a set of encyclopedias on how to build a body. You get one set of encyclopedias from your mom, one set of encyclopedias from your dad at conception, and then your DNA is the same throughout your body. So if we're looking at blood, semen, saliva, all that genetic information is the same across all those fluids. It's even in the cells and the DNA that's left behind in a fingerprint in the body oils and sweat.
Now, what exactly is DNA typing or DNA analysis?
So as a forensic...
Object at this point, because he hasn't been tendered as an expert. So if he's going to go into questions about that, I think he needs to be tendered, and then we have an opportunity to ask you questions.
Well, I'm laying the foundation to get him to an expert.
What was the question?
What exactly is DNA typing or DNA analysis?
I think you'd have to be an
I'll
expert.
sustain the objection since you're asking me specifically to go into explaining what the process is.
Okay. Have you been trained in DNA typing, DNA analysis?
Yes, sir.
And over the 35 years of being a senior DNA analyst, is that your job?
Yes.
And can you tell the court as to what that process is?
What DNA analysis is?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And is that something that you've been doing for the last 35 years?
Yes, sir.
So at this time, I would move to tender him as an expert in DNA analysis.
Did you want to, what do you,
We'll hear him on that at this point, Judge.
all right, you may.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You indicated that at this point you are more into research than you are actually doing the DNA testing. Would that be fair to say?
Well, this year's been kind of a big year, so I've been doing actually a lot of casework this year. But yeah, my job responsibilities span both research, casework, and advising the Deputy Assistant Director.
And what were you doing in 2021? What was your job in 2021?
I was the DNA technical leader.
Okay. And did you actually do the testing on this case?
So we do kind of a team approach. There was an analyst that did some of the extractions on this, and then I took it after the extraction on.
Okay, so you didn't actually do the testing, you looked at it afterwards?
I did some of the testing, yes. So he did, this individual did the extraction, then I did and we'll probably get into this later, but I did the quantitation, concentration, amplification, genetic analyzer analysis, and then the interpretation and comparison, along with the statistical calculations.
And
Sorry, as well as the statistical calculations. Statistical stats.
And who was the analyst that did the other portions of that case?
Mr. Clavens, Adam Clavens.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Adam Clavens.
Okay.
He's another analyst in our laboratory.
What is your, do you have a doctorate degree?
No, sir.
Okay. And what is your actual title?
Senior
An
scientist.
actual title other than,
Senior scientist of the DNA section.
how many times have you been declared an expert by the courts?
This is, I believe, my 90th time testifying both at the local, state, and federal level.
And have you been qualified here in Cobb County on any cases in the past?
I don't believe so, no, sir.
Okay. I don't think I have any further questions, Judge.
All right. Peter Horowitz.
I don't have any objection to him being qualified.
Okay, so he is tendered and qualified as a DNA analyst expert.
Thank you, Judge. So, can you go through the process of DNA analysis?
So the goal of DNA analysis is to collect DNA or biological material from evidence from a crime scene, develop DNA profiles from that evidence, and then compare those profiles to the DNA profiles from relevant individuals, determine who could or couldn't be included, or who could or couldn't be possibly included as contributors to those DNA profiles, and then draw conclusions from there.
Now, can you explain the process for conducting DNA typing?
So the first step, and probably the most important step, is the DNA collection, collecting it at the scene, and then collecting the biological material from the evidence itself. This is usually some type of a swabbing collection method. Then we extract the DNA. This is a series of steps that separates the DNA from the cellular and environmental debris. Once we've extracted and purified the DNA, then we determine how much DNA we actually recovered from the evidence. We may have to concentrate the DNA down, but eventually we amplify the DNA. We use a process called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. This is basically just a molecular Xerox machine that makes millions and millions of copies of specific regions of the DNA. If you go back to the analogy of thinking of DNA as a set of encyclopedias, it's like you're going back in and making specific copies of paragraphs within these sets of encyclopedias and just making millions and millions of copies of those just for visualization purposes. Once we've amplified it, we take those samples and run them through a genetic analyzer. Sorry. Thank you. Run it through. Run those samples through the genetic analyzer, which separates and detects the amplified product. This gives you basically a graphical representation, which is a series of peaks. We then do the interpretation, determine if the profiles are suitable for comparison purposes. If they are, then we perform the DNA analysis on the known DNA samples from the relevant individuals, draw conclusions, and make determinations of whether or not they could be possibly included or excluded as contributors to the DNA, and perform a statistical calculation to lend weight to those conclusions.
Now, once you kind of get that statistical, going backtrack, how exactly are they read? Is it in that graph-like kind of representation when you get the results?
Yes, sir.
What types of results can you get once you get to that point?
So when we do our comparisons, we perform a statistical calculation using the software tools and assistant. And the end product of that is a likelihood ratio. A likelihood ratio is really just a statistical calculation that compares the probability of an event under one or under two different hypotheses. And so for DNA specifically, we calculate a likelihood ratio based on probability of seeing that DNA profile, given that the individual is a contributor, divided by the probability of seeing that DNA profile, given that the person is not a contributor. And so, depending on the magnitude of that likelihood ratio, that determines our conclusion. If you start kind of in the middle of a likelihood ratio of 1, that just means that neither side is favored. The evidence doesn't provide favorability for inclusion or exclusion. As you go to values less than 1, if it's just under 1, close to 1 but less than 1, there's limited support for exclusion, meaning there's some favorability for exclusion, but it's within a range where we have a higher risk of false exclusion. And then as you get further away from 1 all the way down to 0, we would just conclude that the person's excluded as being a possible contributor. Going the other way, if the value is just greater than 1, it's favoring the hypothesis that probability of seeing the evidence given that the person is a contributor. But again, if it's just a little bit greater than 1, you're in that range where you have a higher risk of false inclusion. And so we would say there's limited support for inclusion. But then as you get greater than that and further away from 1, you have more and more support for probability of seeing that evidence given that the person is included.
Now, when interpreting these results, do you all have population frequencies?
Yes.
Why are they important?
So we need population frequencies to calculate these statistics. There's different forms of each of these genetic markers we look at, so we need to know how frequently these different forms or these different alleles are found in the population in order to calculate the statistics.
Now, has your lab ever conducted testing that led to the exclusion of a suspect?
Yes.
Is DNA typing used in fields other than criminal cases?
Yes, sir.
And under what circumstances would it be used?
DNA typing is used in medical diagnostic testing, paternity testing, ancestry testing, identification of victims from mass disasters or mass graves, etc.
Now, the process in which you do your DNA typing analysis, is that accepted throughout the scientific community?
Yes, sir.
And is it deemed reliable?
Yes, sir.
And do you know if other agencies use this method?
Yes, sir.
Now, are there controls in place to ensure reliability for your testing?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe them?
We have positive and negative controls that are used throughout the process. Positive controls, a known DNA sample, so we know what the results are supposed to be. And that just ensures that that the DNA analysis was performed correctly throughout. We also have negative controls that have all the same reagents that are used for everything else, except we don't add DNA to those, and those are to detect any contamination. Contamination.
Now, is there also proficiency testing?
Yes, sir.
And can you explain that?
So proficiency tests, it's a program where we get a set of DNA samples from an external laboratory where we don't know what the results are. We perform our analysis, we submit our results back to that agency. They compare them to the expected results and let us know kind of how we did. Hopefully they match. We do this twice a year.
Is there also some form of quality assurance?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain that?
So the quality assurance program is a program that ensures we produce quality products. This covers everything from laboratory security and the laboratory building, all the way from how we hire people, the training of the people, the methods we use, all the way to how we report our analyses as well.
Now, could someone with the same knowledge, experience, and understanding of this process ensure that the testing is repeatable? Sorry, that was a bad question. Can someone with the same training experience as you complete that same analysis and yield the same results?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a peer review process?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain to the court what that is?
It's kind of two levels of review. Our laboratory as a whole, because we're accredited, we go through periodic audits from external agencies to make sure we comply with the standards for the accreditation. As a DNA unit specifically, we have to follow the National Quality Assurance Standards, and so we are audited by an external agency every 2 years. But then specifically for these analyses, every report that we put out goes through a technical review. This is a review that's conducted by another qualified DNA analyst, and they review our notes, our laboratory processes, all our worksheets, our results, our conclusions, and the report itself to make sure we didn't make any technical errors. And then after that's performed, we do an administrative review, which is by another individual. This individual makes sure that the report and the analyses were conducted following the laboratory's protocols and guidelines.
Now, I want to direct your attention to this case here. How did you come to work with this case?
Evidence and the transmittal was submitted to our laboratory.
And what were you requested to do?
We were requested, our laboratory was requested to perform DNA analysis on 3 9mm cartridge cases and a set of 2 swabs from a firearm, and then no DNA samples from 4 individuals.
Okay. Now, were you able to fulfill that request?
Yes, sir.
Now, what items did you specifically analyze?
We looked at those, or we analyzed those 3 9mm cartridge cases, the 2 swabs, and then the 4 samples, known DNA samples from 4 individuals.
Now, I'm going to show you I'm going to show you what's already been admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 657. Do you recognize the labeling on this 657?
Yes, sir.
And if you'll turn it over, what is this labeled as?
This is labeled as the known DNA sample from Jacob Hicks, the buccal swabs.
And is this the buccal swabs that were used in your analysis?
Yes, sir.
Then moving to State's Exhibit 482 that's already been admitted into evidence, do you recognize the labeling on that?
Yes, sir.
And if you'll flip it over again, what is this exhibit?
These are labeled as the known DNA samples from Matthew Scott Lanz, buccal swabs.
Now, State's Exhibit 602, 603, 604, do you recognize the labeling on those?
Yes, sir.
And what are these exhibits?
These are labeled as the 3 9mm fire cartridge cases.
And are these the cartridge casings that were swabbed for DNA?
Yes, sir.
Now, once you had all of this information, or all of these exhibits, did you conduct your analysis?
Yes, sir.
And once you conducted your analysis of those exhibits, did you reduce your findings to a report?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 671. You recognize State's Exhibit 671?
Yes, sir.
How do you recognize it?
It has my initials on each page and then the final page is signed.
Is this your report for this case?
Yes, sir.
At this time, the state moves to enter what's marked as State's Exhibit 671 into evidence.
Is there any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, we object to the document itself going out because it's a report, it's continuing testimony.
Well-
You can testify from it, certainly, but not to have it tendered and go out to the court.
Let me give you a response.
So that objection doesn't go towards the admissibility of the report itself. Now, his objection would be at a different time.
I was going to say, you're talking about the court seeing it or being admitted?
I mean, it can be admitted as part of the case, but it can't go back to the court because it's continuing testimony.
Okay, but your I was asking if there's an objection to its admittance. So,
Correct, only as to going to the court,
Okay.
be able to use that and read from it.
okay, so I don't think we're there yet. So I'm going to overrule the objection as to, I'll admit it over objection. And then when we get to
Specific part.
evidence that the court will get to review, then we can address that. But I'm going to admit it over the objection.
Thank you, Judge. May I call the judge?
Yes.
All right.
You're welcome.
I'm now showing you the first page of 607, State's Exhibit 671. What is this header up here?
That's just describing our laboratory.
And is that the ATF?
Yes.
All right. Now down here, below that to the right, is what information do we find here?
So that's the date the report was transmitted. It's our laboratory's case number, has the two submission numbers, or evidence was submitted at two different times. It has the reference number, which is our ATF agent's case number, because of course that's different. Then there's the title of the actual investigation, and then for this the type of exam, it's my specific exam, forensic biology.
Now, under reference title, what is the reference title that you have here?
The title is Verbena Drive Homicide.
Now, what information did you have when you actually received these items?
There's usually a report of investigation that we get along with the evidence that describes where the evidence came from. Potentially a little bit of background so we know what we're actually performing DNA analysis on.
And from where it came from, is that a Verbena Drive homicide?
Yes.
Okay. Now, down below, we have listed exhibits. What are these three here?
So lab exhibit numbers 1, 2, and 3, as well as agency exhibit numbers 1, 2, and 3, are the three 9mm cartridge cases.
And are those the three that you've already identified in your testimony?
Yes, sir.
Now, I did forget to show you State's Exhibit 461 that's already been admitted into evidence. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, sir.
Now, is 461 the what you have listed here as number 4?
Yes, sir.
And is that the swabs of the ZEV 9 OZ9?
That's how they were identified to us, yes.
Okay. Now, as we continue down in that section, what were the other items that were submitted to you?
So exhibits 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the 4 known DNA samples from the relevant individuals.
Now, you have already, for number 5 and number 6, were those the items that you've already identified here in court?
Yes, sir.
Now, if you will please, let me ask this. As we proceed through your report, do you have some sort of a grid system indicating the results?
Yes, in order to try to simplify how we report results, we report it in a table fashion.
Now, I'm going to show you page 2 of 671. Now, for the court, can you walk through this grid so we can understand your findings?
Yes. So the left column is the exhibit number. So we just talked about exhibits 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are the 4 known DNA samples. Going across there, we have the sub-exhibit number. So whenever we take a cutting of something, we create a sub-exhibit from that. So 5.1, 6.1, 7.1, 8.1. 5.1, 6.1, 7.1, and 8.1 are all the sub-exhibits from exhibits 5 through 8. 5.1, this is the cutting of the known DNA sample from Matthew Scott Lanz. 6.1 was the known DNA sample from Jacob Hicks. 7.1 was the known DNA sample from Steven Sinatra. And then 8.1 was the known DNA sample from Timothy Hicks. So you go across, the next column lists results. So here we just kind of summarize the DNA profile we saw. These were known DNA samples, so they should be single source. So in this case, for all 4 of these, we obtained a single source male DNA profile. The next column just lists whether or not that profile is suitable for comparison. Again, these are known DNA samples, so yes, they were all 4 were suitable for comparison. Going down to exhibit number 1, 2, 3, that's the combined sample of the fired cartridge cases. That just fell under sub-exhibit 1.1. Those are the combined swabs from the 3 9mm cartridge cases. The result from that was a DNA profile consistent with 2 contributors. At least one of those contributors was male, and it was suitable for comparison. Going across, there's a whole section for conclusions, and you can see those 5 conclusions I listed before. In this case, found that there was support for inclusion for Jacob Hicks, exhibit 6.1, support for inclusion as a contributor, possible contributor to this profile from the 3 fired cartridge cases.
And I'm going to kind of stop you there, and then we'll just talk about that finding, and we'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
So going to the exhibit number 1, 2, 3 column here, we see combined swabs from 3 9mm cartridge casings. Were swabs taken of those 3 casings?
Yes, it's a kind of a rinse and swab method that we developed specifically for fired cartridge cases. And we're kind of weighing, if we do each one individually, we expect very little amounts of DNA from fired cartridge cases. So since these all had the same markings, same caliber, the individual collected the DNA from all 3 of these as one sample.
So swab all 3 of them, and that was used in your comparison to these known DNA samples of Matthew Lanz, Jacob Hicks, Steven Sinatra, and Timothy Hicks.
Correct.
All right. Now, did you follow your DNA analysis process while comparing the DNA profile from the 9mm cartridge cases to the known DNA profiles?
Yes.
Now, is that what we're finding as a result here in that second, or I guess the 4th box to the right?
So that result is determining whether or not the profile is suitable for comparison, and then the next columns are the actual results of the comparisons.
Now, for the results for the cartridge cases, were 2 types of profiles found?
It was determined to be a mixture of 2 individuals, yes.
All right. Now, as we move over, we see Jacob Hicks. What does it mean when Jacob Hicks is in this column?
So if you remember when we described the possible results we can get from our comparisons, one of those was support for inclusion. And so when we did this comparison to Mr. Hicks, to Jacob Hicks, then the likelihood ratio favored, gave a result that was much greater than 1. Therefore, it favored the probability of seeing this evidence given that Jacob Hicks was a contributor to the mixture.
Now, were you sent the DNA profile of Amber Hicks?
Yes. Or no, sorry, no, sir.
All right. Is it possible if it could be an Amber Hicks's DNA on these cartridge casings?
Yes, she could be the second individual, yes.
And over here on the far right, we haven't got to this column here. What's this column?
That's the result that favored exclusion. And in this case, these individuals were excluded as being possible contributors to the DNA profile.
So for the cartridge casings themselves was Matthew, Lanz, Stephen Sinatra, and Timothy Justin Hicks excluded from these two profiles that was found, given the population frequency.
Yes, I mean, it's a single profile. It's a mixture of two individuals, but yes, they were excluded as being contributors to that mixture.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about touch DNA. What is touch DNA?
So touch DNA, trace DNA, this is just a general reference to something different than what we typically thought of DNA analysis in the past, where it was blood and body fluids. This is being able to get a DNA profile from something you've touched or it's been touched. It's DNA that's left behind in the body oils or sweat in a fingerprint, or it doesn't have to be a finger, but something that's come in contact with you.
Now, if a child were to pick up a casing and play with it, is it possible for that child's DNA to be on a casing?
Yes.
Now, in your experience on discharge casings or cartridges, how successful are you in actually extracting DNA off of spent casings?
On a per sample basis, about 30% of the time, we get a DNA profile that's suitable for comparison from a sample from fire cartridge cases.
After a casing is actually fired, is that when a majority of the DNA could be destroyed?
There's a lot of factors that affect how much DNA we recover and the quality of that DNA. There's just the deposition itself is affected by the substrate, how much pressure, how the pressure was applied, but also the substrate itself. One of the biggest factors we found was DNA interacts with copper that's in brass and degrades DNA, which can have almost as big of a degradation effect as the firing process. So there's many different factors that can affect the amount of DNA we recover from a fire cartridge case.
Now, not only physically holding it, if a casing is ejected out of a firearm and lands on a carpet within a house occupied by residents, is it possible for their DNA to end up on that cartridge casing?
Is it possible? Potentially. But again, there's a lot of factors. More DNA transfers with direct contact, more contacts that happen. The further away you get from the direct contact, the less DNA that can be transferred. Depends how much DNA and biological material is on that carpet to begin with. If it falls in a corner that's not stepped on very often, or there's not much contact with your skin, that would reduce the amount of DNA that can be transferred. If people don't walk in their bare feet on the carpet, then there might not be much biological material there to begin with to transfer. Things transfer if they're wet more often than if dried surfaces, so there's a lot of factors that would affect that.
Now, for your findings in this specific examination of the casings, were you able to, did you find a population frequency?
We performed our statistical calculation, yes.
Now, moving to page,
Our statistical calculation.
I'm moving to page 3 of State's Exhibit 671. Now, within this paragraph here, if you'll tell the court what your findings were as it relates to Jacob Hicks.
Do you mind if I read from the report?
If you'll read from the report.
So the statistical calculation number 1, which if you look at the table again, that's what was in that final column. We label each of the statistical calculations. First, we list what the conclusion was to begin with, and that was a DNA profile consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals was obtained from this sample, Exhibit 1.1, which again was the DNA collected from the 3 fired cartridge cases. we list our assumptions. So in this case, we're assuming that 2 individuals are assumed to have contributed to the DNA profile. And then we list the 2 different hypotheses. So again, when we're talking about the likelihood ratio, this is probability of seeing the evidence under one hypothesis, which in this case, call it the inclusionary hypothesis. The DNA originated from Jacob Hicks and an unrelated unknown individual, or the other hypothesis, in this case, the exclusionary hypothesis. The DNA originated from 2 unrelated unknown individuals. Those are the assumptions and the hypotheses. And so then the actual likelihood ratio, the DNA profile is at least 1 trillion times more likely if it originated from Jacob Hicks and an unrelated unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unrelated unknown individuals. Kind of putting this in a different context, the probability of an unrelated individual in the population who has not contributed DNA to this sample yielding this level of support is less than 1 in 1 trillion. And then F, the F statement, just based on this calculation, there is evidentiary support for the inclusion of Jacob Hicks as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained from Exhibit 1.1. And that last statement, we had one locus, one of the genetic markers we look at, SC33, had an artifact in it, so we did not use that in the calculation.
Now, I want to talk about the population frequency. 1 trillion is a big number. Is that the specific number, or do you have parameters as to your frequency?
The actual likelihood ratio is bigger than that, but we cap it at 1 trillion because once you get to quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, it becomes kind of meaningless. So we cap it at 1 trillion.
So it's more than the 1 trillion, but for your guidelines, you stop at 1 trillion.
Yes.
All right. Now I'm going to move back to page 2 of this exhibit. Now, if you'll walk through this line in the grid for the judge.
Sorry, I didn't see which line.
Sorry, the last line here.
So here, again, we're talking about Exhibit 4, and then the sub-item from that, which is the cuttings of the swabs. These were the set of swabs from the pistol. And again, we've obtained a DNA profile consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals. At least one of those was male. We determined that the profile was suitable for comparison purposes. And then, in this case, Matthew Scott Lanz, there was support for inclusion of Matthew Scott Lanz as being a contributor to this mixture.
Now, and over here on the excluded, who do we see here?
So Jacob Hicks, Stephen Sinatra, and Timothy Hicks were all excluded as possible contributors to this DNA profile.
Now, were you sent the DNA profile of a Scott Lanz?
Just Matthew Scott Lanz, not Scott Lanz, yes.
Now, if Matthew Scott Lanz's father touched this gun, would their DNA match?
Match.
I don't understand that question. Would it match with what?
Let me,
You can just rephrase what.
yeah, I'll rephrase my question. Sorry, Jeff. Let me give an example. If both Matthew Scott Lanz and Scott Lanz touched this gun, or a gun, would you see a difference between the DNA profile?
We can distinguish between father and son, yes.
And so in the swab that was taken of the pistol compared to these DNA profiles, was Matthew Scott Lanz included?
There was support for his inclusion as a contributor to the DNA profile from the swabs of the firearm.
Now, with your results, it reads that there is another contributor to that mixture. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
If the father had touched this gun, is it possible that his DNA is on the gun too?
It is possible, yes.
And not being sent his DNA profile, are you unable to tell us whether or not the father's DNA is on the gun?
Correct. Without being able to make that comparison, we can't determine.
Now, going to the population frequency of Matthew Lanz's population frequency of inclusion, if you'll tell the court your finding.
So again, I don't know if you want me to repeat these, but they're kind of the same. The initial statement, then A, B, and C are all the same as above because these were both two-person mixtures. Inclusionary hypothesis, Matthew Scott Lanz, and inclusionary hypothesis was DNA originated from Matthew Scott Lanz and an unknown, unrelated individual. Exclusionary hypothesis is that the DNA originated from two unrelated, unknown individuals. The likelihood ratio, statement D, the DNA profile is at least 1 trillion times more likely if it originated from Matthew Scott Lanz and an unknown or unrelated unknown individual than if it originated from two unrelated unknown individuals. And again, putting this in a little bit different context, the probability of an unrelated individual in the population who has not contributed DNA to this sample yielding this level of support is less than 1 in 1 trillion. Based on this calculation, there's evidentiary support for the inclusion of Matthew Scott Lanz as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained from 4.1, which were the swabs of the firearm.
So now, just to go back to this, to page 1 of the exhibit. So those findings that you just gave to the court were that the swabs of the ZEV OZ9 pistol had 2 profiles on them, one of which was Matthew Scott Lanz.
There was support for inclusion of him as being a possible contributor, yes.
Now, as you finalized your report, was it peer reviewed?
Yes, sir.
And was it approved through the peer review process?
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you. You, Barry, you can proceed with your cross.
Just got a couple of questions. You received the firearm, correct? In your lab?
I actually don't know. I just know from what we received for DNA analysis, we received the fire cartridge cases and the 2 swabs of the firearm. I don't know if we received the firearm itself at the laboratory in Maryland.
Does your lab, I know it's an ATF lab, do they process firearms for trace evidence? Do you know?
Yes.
They do. Okay. And do you know whether this firearm was ever given to the lab for any trace evidence?
I believe it went for the exam at our Atlanta laboratory. And so if it went there, they would treat it like any other piece of evidence where we try to maximally exploit any potential evidence on that, which includes fingerprints, trace, fibers, and DNA.
And I was a little confused about this question. Would it be possible for Amber Hicks's DNA to be on the shell casings? You were not given her DNA sample, or were you?
We were not, therefore couldn't make that comparison.
So when the state asks you if it's possible, I guess anything's possible, but it's not the probable. If you didn't get it, there's no way you'd be able to know, right?
I can't say if it's probable or not probable. I wasn't given the sample to do the comparison.
Okay. All we know is that Jacob Hicks' DNA did show up on those shell casings.
There was support for inclusion of Jacob Hicks on those cartridge cases. I can't say definitively one way or the other.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Barry. Any Lowitz, is there any follow-up or redirect?
No, Judge.
And Mr. Bille, be excused?
Yes, Judge.
Thank you, excused.
Thank you very much.
Why don't we take a quick break, and if I can have the attorneys approach just one moment.